All right, so for the April meetup for the Atlanta Scrum user group, I would like to introduce Kris Wickett with Trust, the Secret Ingredient in Scrum.
Hello there. I am actually in Minneapolis, but I heard someone say Arlington, Texas. Is that correct? Because I used to live there for 32 years. Originally from Minneapolis, moved to Texas, and just moved back and joined the improving team here in Minneapolis. So, to Glenn's point, please don't be shy of asking any questions, comments, or anything like that. We definitely want to have it as interactive as you guys would like it to be. Two things you'll notice about me. One, I love quotes. And this is one of my favorite quotes, that teamwork. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And I really look at that in the Agile spirit of what we're asking folks to do, of change and different mindsets, and really assist through Scrum and Agile and all of the different techniques to assist folks in delivering products that wow our customers. And so this is really the important part on behalf of teamwork and helping folks to see the magic that can be created. The other thing that will crack you up about this is, as we go through this and we talk about the journey of new things and improving the foundation and trust on its impact, is I use cooking as an analogy for a lot of the things that I talk about, even though I don't cook. I have my claim to fame, Christmas cookies once a year, but I grew up in the restaurant business. And I know that from my experience has a lot about the teamwork and the trust and the agility and the magic that we have when we create meals and food and so on. So that's why I always bring it back to that secret ingredients being trust. And that really, from my perspective, helps with what Scrum brings to the table and helping us bring that trust to light and helping us to, if you will, continue to improve. So that's why with Julia Childs as a background, thinking about what's our secret ingredient. Anytime we're working together, we're asking our folks to change our mindset, again, at all different levels in the organization. We want to look and see why are we doing that and how can we continue to build that trust and strong teamwork. So that's why I go back to the cooking analogy, even though, like I say, I don't cook. So anytime that we're learning something, and again, any of those who are cooks right now, and the journey of learning, I always like to take a look at the words of advice from a great chef or from whomever that we're learning from. So like for Julia Childs and everything that we do, specific though to cooking or baking, no one is born a great cook. We learn by doing, and that's how we do things in Scrum. That's how we do things at work, is we learn by doing and taking, if you will, that experimental approach and those feedback loops that we have. And so that's where we want to really focus on learning how to cook and trying the new things, learning from your mistakes, being fearless. And most importantly, you guys, having fun, really creating that passion of continuous learning, continuous improvement, and helping folks to see that by trying new things and perhaps making a mistake or failing fast, we're one step closer to getting it right. So being bold and brave and helping with that. And that's what I think Scrum can help us to do too. And that's really what can help us to build that trust. So when we're learning things and that journey coming from, beginner to advanced and intermediate to advanced, this also can be known as agile fluency or whatever. But if we use it in the example of the metaphor of a chef, if I'm going to make chicken noodle soup and I am going to start and I don't have any experience in cooking or making soup or anything like that, the same would apply for agile or anything that we're learning. The first step that we're going to call it is shu. And this is, again, this fluency that we go from shu, ha, and to re. And what shu means is it's the beginning, and that we follow the rules, we follow the recipe, we follow the directions on the can to the T until we build up that confidence and we understand what we're doing. And it's then that we start moving into what we call ha. And that's practicing different things. And we start to break free and we start to internalize why we're doing things. So if I use the analogy again to making chicken noodle soup, I get really good at following the directions on a can, but I might even get brave in that shu shoe status, if you will, of starting to add a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But it's when I start to really internalize understanding what the ingredients brings and the different ways of doing things that I start to break free, and I start to have my own recipe, or my grandma's favorite recipe, or my grandfather's favorite recipe, or whatever it is. And I again start to add secret ingredients to that, or a little of this and a little of that. The same applies to us when we're learning Scrum and Agile and all of that. We start to break free, but we never forget the foundations that we have. And that's a really important part of the journey, is when we're moving from shoe, we're just following and doing what something is. And as we get to ha, we start to break free, and we're starting to internalize why we're doing things. And then same thing when we get to being an expert of re, we're transcending, and now we're teaching others and we're learning from others. And it's a continuous pattern that we're learning from each other, sharing our lessons learned, and really transcending to being an expert. Because what we all know is the more we know, the more we don't know. And so being that continuous learner and really becoming fluent at different things and enjoying the journey. So this can be from, cooking, baking, it can be I'm a huge water skier, same kind of thing, anything that we're learning. And that's where I look at it from Scrum also, is helping us to get from that following to then breaking free and really internalizing different things. So this can be known as Agile fluency also. Because at the end of the day, what we're looking for is the simplicity of what Scrum brings us, the simplicity of wowing our customers and really building the right thing at the right time. And so for this, one of my favorite quotes here is, simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Anyone can make anything complicated or, really complex, but we want to back that off to say, how can we do this in the most simple manner and reward that simple is hard? So that's kind of the spirit of what we're going to go through, is, tying it all back to how can we keep things simple, building in that trust, and then going through that learning curve, if you will, from shu to ha to re, for everything that we do. And when we talk about trust and so on, it's from that individual and team and organization's perspective too. Any comments, questions? Anyone who does jazz cooking or anything like that, where it's a little of this, a little of that? My sister and my mom are like that they don't follow recipes or anything. They call that jazz cooking. So anyway, the one thing that I also like about when we have the Agile Manifesto, the simplicity here too. We know that we have our values and we have our principles. They look really easy, but we know that simple is hard. So how do we do this? And how do we make all of these things come to fruition? And that's when we get Scrum, and we help to have that done, of how do we take those values and principles and deliver those valuable products? And again, how can we trust that we're getting things done? Because at the end of the day, that really is the magic that that teamwork can bring, and helping to really deliver that quality product. So for a working title, what we're going to go with, what is trust? And to Glenn's point, this comes from The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And the working definition that we're going to go for is that trust is the confidence born of character and competence of a person or organization. So if we start with that as our foundation of what trust is, let's kind of walk through what does that manifest itself through, and how can we build that trust? So we know in Scrum, we have our 3 pillars of empiricism. We've got transparency, inspection, adaptation, and all at the bottom of that is trust and courage. And that sounds, again, really simple to do, and it can be simple, but it is hard, if you will, if we don't have the values that go with it. Being courageous. We want to focus on one thing at a time. We want to be committed, be respectful, and openness. So again, this is a building block for us on building trust with our team, with our organization, and with our customers. And I think that's the really important thing, is continuing to build that trust, having that transparency, inspection, and adaptation. That's why when we go through the 13 trust behaviors, you'll see that the Scrum framework can really set up a great foundation for building and continuing that trust.
Kris, you definitely touched on this, but I will say that as a Scrum Master, trying to improve the team, right? There are things that we operate on that are very much visible to us, which is, who is Is everybody, collaborating during the daily scrum to talk about what we're going to do for the next 24 hours? Is everybody giving feedback, speaking up during the retrospective? But to kind of see, is the trust of the team improving?
Exactly.
That takes so long and so much time working with a team to understand human behavior and all that sort of thing. But it makes for an incredibly valuable scrum master.
Exactly. Yeah. And magic happens. We know when we
Yeah.
have that. Yeah. And that's what I always think about is the teams that have been magical. What is that secret ingredient? And I always trace it back to trust. It really is. And this is, again, simple as hard. And the Scrum framework is super simple, but we all know that is hard to master. And so that's where, again, we bring in that simplicity. And how can we break things down into small pieces and keep things going and delivering that value to our customers, if you will, and making sure that we're working on the right thing at the right time. Because I think that's another big piece of the puzzle that we want to make sure of partnering with our product owners and our stakeholders, and really understanding if we're headed in the wrong direction, the worst part we can get off is however long our sprint is, and then we can get back on track. And that's the spirit of all of the events, if you will. And that's what we're going to focus on when we go through the behaviors of what are the events that can help us to continue to build that trust with our teams and our stakeholders. So going back to the foundations of trust, the analogy of a tree can be really helpful. And this again comes from Stephen Covey, that if we talk about character and competence, what we want to make sure is what are those things that go inside that. At the roots of everything that we do is our integrity. And we can't see our integrity, what we can, blatantly, we look through that from behavior and what our characteristics are. And out of integrity also comes intent. And so I look at that as the roots that we grow up with, our culture or whatever, but then our intent is like that trunk of the tree. What is our intent? Is it positive intent, negative intent, and making sure that we're always living towards the intent of positivity and, if you will, truthful and trust. Because once we get outside of that, we get into our competence. And if you use the analogy of a tree, that our capabilities are like the branches, that we are capable of doing different things, and we can grow different capabilities through continuous learning, continuous improvement, and so on. And that's what, like, you guys are doing here in meetups. That's a huge part of the Agile mindset and the culture, is that continuous learning. We also want to bring that into our organizations, as you guys have been doing, because then we have our results, and that helps us with, if you will, that competence. But we know from the way a tree is built that the results being the leaves and the capabilities being the branches, those are the things that we can see. But at the foundation of everything is our intent and our integrity. And that's where we can get the 13 behaviors to kind of work together with all of the different Scrum events. So another interesting thing here is that trust comes from many different perspectives, but we always start with ourselves first. And then we build that out to relationship, organizational, market, and societal. And so we always want to make sure that we are focused on ourselves, going back to our integrity and on our intent, and then the competency that people can see from the organization's market and so on. So it's really important to make sure that we are leaning in to that integrity and intent. Now, while this study has been a few years, it probably has even more, is more relevant these days. But when we build in trust into our organizations, we know that positivity can come out of that. And that, again, is when I always look at what is the intent, positive or negative, and always wanting to make sure that we are leaning in to that high trust environment. And that's, again, where Scrum can really help us to build that into it. So let's take a look at the 13 behaviors. And while there are 13, they build on themselves. If you're interested in the book, it talks about that you get good at each one of them and you continually practice them. There are different techniques that you can use, like trust pods and so on, that meet weekly to practice really digging into these different behaviors. And that's the cool thing about behaviors, is we can adapt our behavior to what we're trying to practice. And so they sound really simple, but that's why they build on themselves. So we'll go one by one, and don't be shy to holler out, because what I really want to do is highlight the different ways that we can have Scrum events continue to build the trust that you guys have. So as Glenn mentioned earlier, the interesting thing we want to be to pay attention to are the counterfeit behaviors. We'll go through each behavior of what it is and what it's not, but it's those counterfeit behaviors that can really put us into an interesting situation. And so if we go back to our pillars of transparency, inspection, and adaptation, that's the beauty that we can help to mitigate any counterfeit behaviors that we've got. One of these bills is counterfeit, but I can't remember which one. Does anyone happen to have a guess which one might be counterfeit if there's a guru out there in counterfeit money? No? All right. I'll send you guys the deck and see if you guys can come up with it. I think it's the bottom one, but I'm not sure. All right, so let's go ahead and get started because the first one is talk straight. Sounds super simple, but we know that it can be challenging. And so what I wanted to highlight here is if we take a look at the Scrum events and talking straight, what we know is we want to be honest and we want to tell the truth and we don't want to demonstrate integrity. And that's the really cool thing about Scrum because it's all about that. It's about getting that understanding of that vision. What are we trying to accomplish? What is our North Star? And how are we going about that? And through all of the events, through whether it be the stand-up, the sprint planning, the reviews, retros, whatever it is all about demonstrating that integrity and not about withholding the information. When we're doing our sprint reviews, we want to talk straight. We want to say, hey, we forecasted or we planned this amount of work, but we actually got this amount of work done. And we really want to make sure that they understand that that's the beauty of the continuous cycle and cadence of those reviews, that we're transparent and that we are adapting to the facts if we are not on track. Because again, planning is just an estimate. And when we're coming back to the review, we want to make sure that we are saying what we've accomplished compared to what we didn't accomplish. And if for any reason that we're off track, a gap, if you will, we want to say what we're doing to get back on track. And that's the beauty of that cadence and making sure that you have your stakeholders coming to your reviews. That's also the really important thing about retros is talking straight. Now, that said, what I do want to make sure of is that everyone, and it's not you guys, I'm sure, but what's really important is that when we talk straight, that our tone is kind. Because I think sometimes when people hear talk straight, that they forget about being kind. And so I always want to make sure folks understand that we need to, again, that's where I go back to that intent and integrity, because it's people, I believe it's people's intent to do positive things. So if it comes across a different way, just being mindful of our tone when we're talking straight. But we don't want to hold information back. We don't want to beat around the bush because again, when we're in that cadence of updates, that bad news never gets better. And we want to take advantage of that. Building off of the number one, we have demonstrate respect. And that again sounds super simple, but it can be challenging sometimes. And so this is where, again, where I would say specifically the review, if you will, is a great place to demonstrate and have everybody be able to show off the things that we've accomplished, because it takes a team to get things done. And we want to genuinely care for our team and make sure that every role on our team is represented. If you look at the counterfeit here about faking respect or concern, showing respect or concern for someone that can do something for you, but not for all. And this is, again, a really important part of our review and our retrospective. Again, kindness, our tone is super important here, but it's also working with the business and the IT organization so that together we're creating that magic for our customers. And so demonstrating respect is a really important part that we can, again, show that off in our reviews and even our daily scrums, if you will, that we are able to say, hey, do you need help? Is there anything that we can do? And we want to make sure that our product owner is part of that whole thing. So this can, again, build that respect that we have for the team.
Kris, the concept of respect, or the card for respect in the deck here talks about, and what I'm alluding to is this thing called speed of trust. Can you see it? It's like a little deck of cards that has all the different trust behaviors listed. It's a great quick reference, and I'll post a link to that. I think there's a PDF version available online. Anyway, the cards talk about, with respect, that what happens under times of stress is that people tend to get efficient with other people.
Yes.
And act with less respect, and then sort of seek forgiveness later, instead of recognizing that and trying to correct it in themselves. And I think that, a couple of sessions of stressful weeks where you're busting butt to try to meet a sprint goal in a time or whatever, and being efficient with people, that's going to erode trust, and it's hard to recover from that.
It is. That's a really good point. Thank you. You're exactly right. Especially during stressful situations, you guys resist that temptation to go back into the old ways of doing things and continue. Yeah. And being, if you will, kind. Yeah. Yes, exactly. All right. Number 3, I find interesting, create transparency, because again, that's what Scrum is all about. We know that, but transparency can also be challenging. And so what we want to do is build up that trust. And again, we want to tell the truth in a way that people can verify for themselves. And we go back to declaring your intent. What I think is interesting on this one is, again, that's the spirit of the short time boxes. It is helping us to create that transparency, to validate, if you will, our estimate against actuals. And what are we actually getting done? What's the velocity of the team? And helping the team to realize that if we're needing to make changes, we want to be transparent with our stakeholders and so on, and what we need to do there. Because again, we don't want to withhold information. We want to make sure that, again, bad news never gets better. But if we're doing really well, we want to make sure that we're highlighting that too. So creating transparency is an interesting one, because Simon Sinek, if any of you guys follow him, he just had a quote on LinkedIn, I think it was last week, about transparency, because there are certain things perhaps that we may not be able to be part of that whole decision making for a variety of reasons, but we can understand that, hey, what was the reasoning behind making that decision? And that's a really important part of transparency, is why were those decisions made, so that people can understand and start to build trust upon that. And that's, again, another really good opportunity that we can say at our daily stand-ups and so on, of creating transparency to say, hey, I'm behind, or I need help, or whatever it needs to, so that we all can work together as a team to make sure that we're getting it done together. Because that, again, is the magic of Scrum and getting those vertical slices. Righting wrongs, building off of that, again, that can be hard for some to admit that they made a mistake, and building that trust. Boy, nothing can help more than that. Sometimes if you end up doing something, I'll call right out and say, hey, you guys, oh my gosh, I thought I was headed in the right direction, but I did this wrong. And that, again, begins with ourselves. So we want to make sure that we do things, make things right. And we want to make sure that we are not covering things up and hiding those mistakes. And I think that's another opportunity that we have inside the Scrum framework, of making sure that we are, the minute that we are headed in the wrong direction, again, saying, hey, that's one step closer to being right. One of the things that we had as one of our team working agreements is that if we were headed in the, if we were getting stuck or something, and it wasn't necessarily that we were wrong, but we weren't able to get something right, we wanted to raise our hand right away, of maybe 2 to 4 hours. If I was working on something and I couldn't get it right, we wanted to raise our hand right away and say, hey, I think I'm headed in the wrong direction, or I just need another set of eyes on this. So that was, again, another way to build trust, so that we were able to make sure that folks were seeing that we're calling it out right away. But this one is a really important one, especially if we're headed in the wrong direction and not building the right thing for our customers. We'd rather know that sooner rather than later, and make sure that we are, adjusting. And that's, again, as we all know, the beauty of the time boxes. But helping our business partners, or anyone maybe that's new to Scrum, helping them to see the why we have the time boxes, why we want the shorter sprints for the faster learning and so on, so that we can make sure that we're always headed in the right direction. But as we know on this one, hiding mistakes is something that we don't want to do. And it goes back to that intent and integrity. Building off of this one, showing loyalty. This one is a tough one, because I don't know if the words really hit what it's all about, but it is making sure that we talk about people the same way as if they were here and if they weren't here. What I think is interesting on this one is, if we're showing loyalty, one of the I like this proverb, if you will, of 3 gatekeepers before I perhaps say something as a team member. Is it true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? So as we're going through our retrospectives, especially when we're looking at, people, process, and tools, it's never about the person. And so we want to make sure we're really careful about when we're in our retrospectives, that we are showing that loyalty and we are really getting to the core of that continuous improvement and continuous learning, and making sure that is it something necessary that we need to say, or is it is there a way that I can say it to make sure that we are saying it the right way? Because giving that credit is what we want to make sure, and speaking about it as if they were present. Being two-faced and not giving that credit is really important. So again, that's where I say at our reviews, if we can have people show off what they've done, talk about what they've done, whatever it takes so that they can get that credit, I think is really important. But at our retrospectives too, really important to have that safety and that opportunity to really show that magic as a team. Any comments on the show loyalty? Because that one is a really important one. All right. Continuing on, again, remember that they kind of build on themselves, and so you can continue to practice these behaviors, is deliver results. We know that Scrum helps us to deliver results, and it sounds really simple. But again, going back to what does that look like? This is again why we have the cadence and why we have the continuous sprint reviews and our sprint planning and so on, so that we're making sure that we're delivering our outcomes and not just the outputs of accomplishing tasks. We really want to make sure that we're getting the right things done. And that's again where we talk about the difference between outcomes and outputs. Outputs are just busy work, but what we really want to do is deliver the value to our customer through that continuous sprint, development of sprints, and whether it be features, user stories, whatever we're putting out into production, we want to make sure that it's getting the value to that customer, and we're not just accomplishing tasks without that real value back to the user. Another thing we want to make sure when we're delivering results is that we're not over-promising and under-delivering. And I would even say that we are under-promising and over-delivering, because as we know, it's a fine art to figure out what is the velocity of our team, how much work can we get done, because we want to be predictable. We want to be consistent. We want to incorporate that sustainable pace. And that's why delivering results is a really cool way of continuing to build that trust, that predictability of having that persistent team working, and so that we can see that velocity, and that we're not doing heroics, that we're able to have that predictable forecast and saying, we're working through our backlog. We know based on the results that we'll get this far through our backlog by the end of this time box. And I'm making sure that we're, again, working on the right thing at the right time. This one sounds really simple, but again, making sure that we're working towards the outcomes of delivering that value and not just staying busy. All right, getting better. Again, why you guys are here, and thank you again for sharing your time tonight. Getting better. This is something that is a core of what we do, but we also want to make sure that we're getting better and sharing our knowledge, because what we want to take a look at is that continuous improvement, getting that feedback. We want to be a constant learner. But looking at the counterfeit behavior here, continuing to learn but never produce. Talking a good game about improving, but never doing it. What I think is important here is our retrospectives. Are we really bringing things in for continuous improvement? Are we highlighting 1 or 2 things at the end of every sprint and being ruthless about getting better as a team, getting better as an organization, and getting better with our customers? So that is, again, as we continue to build off of these trusts, we want to make sure that we are really showing that we are getting that feedback and we're really improving. Something that I will fess up for, when I was at American Airlines and I was as an employee, and I was leading the Agile transformation there. And we had a whole bunch of Agile coaches that were part of my team. And what was funny is this is the one area that we were not that good at. We would have all these great ideas coming out of our retrospectives to get better at and have those continuous improvement. But back to Glenn, when you were talking about when you get in stressful situations or so on, we ended up putting the improvements down at the bottom of our list rather than putting them up front. And so this one was one we had to practice all the time, is to resist that temptation to deprioritize getting better. We needed to really build that trust and focus on ourselves in our retrospectives and ask every time, what did we get better at? What are we getting that feedback on? Are we really getting that continuous improvement? Because it can be a lot of talk sometimes, but really focusing on that. And I don't know if you guys have run into that same thing of getting better, but that's really the spirit of our retrospectives, of having that continuous learning and continuous getting better.
Kris, the situation you described is like saying, I can't stop slicing the tomatoes to sharpen my knife. I've just got to keep slicing the tomatoes.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's the key, is we got to make sure we take time to sharpen that knife. Yes. And making sure that leaders see that that's why we're doing it. And again, that's why sharing this with our leaders, with our stakeholders, is really an important thing, so that they can see that's moving from that shoe to following to internalizing, if you will, that ha of why we're doing it. Exactly, to your analogy on the tomatoes. What is that special reason why we're doing it? Confronting reality. This never happens. We always are dealing with this one, but I think this one is the slang of the elephant in the room. And this, again, bringing in Scrum and that inspection, transparency, adaptation, and really understanding what does it mean to confront reality. And it can be scary, but if we continue to build trust and take advantage of the framework and take advantage of the events, this really will help us, because again, bad news never gets better. So we should be able to take issues head on, even those undiscussables, if you will. Acknowledge the unsaid, and going back to those Scrum values, those courageous conversations. We really want to make sure that at our retros, we're doing it in a manner of positive intent and with integrity, because we don't want to attack the person. We want to figure out what can we do as a team to get better. So pretending that in our counterfeit here, pretending to confront the reality when actually we're just evading it. And so we really want to make sure that we're focusing on the right thing at the right time. And again, this can be really challenging, but if we get into the cadence and we have our stakeholders coming to our reviews, we have our persistent teams, and we've got our retros, we've got our daily stand-ups, we've got our planning, our sprint planning. All of these things work together to assist us to confront reality in small pieces. And so it's not this big thing that we wait till at the end of the day or at the end of the project, and that we are now behind scope, behind schedule, whatever. And that, again, is the beauty of that cadence with our Scrum and our framework. All right. Clarifying expectations sounds super simple. Right. And I think this, again, especially in the virtual world, can be even harder, because body language tells us a lot about people, and if are they understanding and so on. And so if we can't see them as well as we did when we were in person, this can be even more challenging. And so this is, again, another opportunity to continue to build that trust. If we take a look at the counterfeit here, it's failing, or we fail to pin down the specifics of our results or our deadlines. And that can really, put us in a situation, going back to confronting reality, going back to talking straight, and so on. So when we clarify our expectations, we want to really reveal that, hey, we thought we were going to be able to get this done. We thought it was this, but it really wasn't when we dug into it. And that, again, is what we want to make sure is everyone understands when we are doing our sprint planning, that everyone on the team is aware of what our expectations are. We know it is just a plan, but as we continue to burn down our hours, we continue to go through our sprint, where are we at on our expectations? Where are we at with the product owner continuing to manage those expectations with the stakeholders and the team and so on? That is a really important part on behalf of building that trust. And I think Scrum helps tremendously in this space, because it helps us to take big things and make them smaller. And the smaller that we have, the easier it is to clarify those expectations and really help to renegotiate if we need to. Because again, that's the beauty of doing our reviews, of saying, here was our plan, but here's our actuals and where are we at on our backlog? Because we may need to renegotiate the priorities. We may need to renegotiate what we're going to get accomplished and that value and those outcomes that we're going to deliver. And you want to do that sooner rather than later. But that definitely is a huge part of building that trust.
Kris, I see this one manifesting quite a bit inside the definition of done itself.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I didn't expect to have all the unit tests pass.
Yep.
But it's in the definition of done, right? I didn't expect all the security audits to be, part of that. It's, you have to agree on that stuff and clarify the expectations of done, so everybody is on the same page, not just in the team, right? But organizationally, you have a definition of done. So I think this applies in there as well.
Excellent point, because sharing that with our stakeholders, especially with the business, is really important. Excellent point, because definition of done, it can also continue to grow as we go through that shu, ha, and re, that we might take on more and more because we're just getting better at things. It doesn't mean that things are taking longer, but it means we're building in perhaps more quality as we're getting better at things. We may be automating things, but you're exactly right. Sharing that definition of done, of all of the things that it takes to build that quality in, sharing and manifesting that to our stakeholders, that this is the beauty of why we build that quality in up front, is so that we're not bringing in technical debt in the for the future. And that is a really important part to share, because we don't want folks taking shortcuts. We want to make sure that we're building that quality in, that definition done at that organization level, so that everyone understands that that's the beauty of having the definition of done, that we are able to deploy whenever we want to, because that quality is in there up front and we're not taking shortcuts. Because I think that is sometimes what can happen on the definition of done if it's not shared, of all the things that we're doing to build that quality in. Excellent point.
I think this is Anne. I think
Anne.
that when we're talking here about clarifying expectations, it seems that, at least from my experience in working with a number of different teams, that when trust is missing, teams don't feel like they can be comfortable with ambiguity.
Yeah.
Or comfortable with uncertainty. So when you have, in terms of the opposite down there that you've got down in red, what they do is they fall back on the guessing. They fall back on the assumptions, and people don't realize that it's a problem of trust. They're thinking that it's a problem of unskilling or lack of experience. And they don't look at it as a trust issue. They look at it and say, well, I haven't been in this area for, maybe over 6 months or a year, or we've got a product owner or a BA or whomever who is new enough that doesn't understand enough of the language to help clarify. So now we've got a different level of accountability that is at odds with each other. And when we talk about clarifying expectations, that whole concept of how do we look at the differences? How do we know what we're looking at? How do we know what our gaps are and aren't? We have probably this one is the biggest issue that I see over and over, because people are coming at it from too many different angles.
Excellent observation. Yeah, that's a really good point. And building that trust to say, hey, we don't have the skill set, or I'm new, or I haven't looked at this too. That's an excellent point, because that is anytime we have assumptions, there's a degree of risk because they're not facts. And that's a really good point. of clarifying that up front. And we know when we have that trust and we could raise our hand to say, hey, we don't have the right skill set, or we haven't done this in a while, kind of thing, can really help. But you have to have that degree of trust to be able to say that. But you're right, that can happen. Good point. Well, speak of the devil, practice accountability. Yes, this is again the opportunity for us to continue to build off of that, and like you say, and helping folks to see. Anytime I start to hear the finger pointing, I'm like, uh-oh, we've got an issue with trust, whatever that is. And we want to make sure, again, going back to starting with ourselves, because we want to hold ourselves accountable first, and then the other second, taking responsibility, and again, going through all those different behaviors of, righting wrongs, whatever it is. But we know by looking at the counterfeit here, blaming others, from my experience, is never helpful. We've got to figure out why something happened, but we don't need to be blaming, if you will, and get into solution space. And what can we do to help out in getting to the better place? Because we want to make sure, again, that if we get off track, or if we don't have the right skill set, or we've made assumptions and they were incorrect, what can we do? One, to right the wrong, but then practice that accountability. Say, oh, I am so sorry, I didn't understand this, or whatever. And that's courageous for people to be able to do that, to be able to speak up in a retrospective, or even at a review, to say, hey, we were headed down this direction. We thought we could build this. We thought the users were going to like it. And we found out that that was not the case. And what a wonderful area to be in, to be able to say that and to raise our hands and have that good conversation with our stakeholders, with our team members, with our leadership, to say, we recognize that we needed to hold ourselves accountable. Because again, when we start pointing fingers, and that goes for anyone in the organization, even when I'm working with leaders, I really, really want to make sure that we always take that step back to say, what can we learn from this, so that we can take that accountability and really build in that trust and have that safe environment. Because as we've talked about, that magic happens when we have that. And owning up and taking advantage of learning opportunities, whether that, needing to mentor with someone else, clarifying that, or whatever. But I think that's a really important part of building trust. And I look at this both from a professional and personal perspective. All of these different behaviors manifest themselves in our personal life too, with our different relationships that we have. And so that's the cool thing about these trust behaviors, is that they can, they're real for any situation that we're living in. Listen first. Sounds simple, right? We have 2 ears, 1 mouth. But if we think about listening first, what does that really mean? So I find this one on the counterfeit behavior interesting. Listen just enough to formulate your response, and you're pretending to listen. And that is a very interesting dilemma that we can get into. That's where, again, by having our teams and having our events and making sure that we've got people coming and understanding what we're doing and why, we are able to be part of that whole conversation, and that we're listening before we're speaking. We're understanding why our business needs this. Why are we wanting to do this? We want to understand from our eyes and our heart. Really, this is empathy, and making sure that we really understand what we're trying to accomplish. This one, again, can be tough, especially in the virtual world, because it's all about, we have to kind of talk over each other or whatever, raise our hand, trying to figure out how we can really listen and, if you will, contribute to the conversation, but in a true manner that we are helping our stakeholders, helping our team to find those solutions that work. Listening can be a tough, and this one's a practice, again, both personal and professional, to really take back and listen and take advantage of techniques to say what I think I heard you say. This is, again, at those reviews, listening to our customers, listening to what they're trying to accomplish. And then we might have to figure out how we can make that happen. But listening is a tough one. But this is, again, a huge opportunity for building that trust. We come out of a retrospective. We've got our improvements that we want to do. We're really paying attention and we're listening throughout that whole sprint. What are we doing to get better at some of these things? And that, again, I think is a practice that we all can, as a team, especially take advantage of and hold ourselves accountable for it. Number 12, this one is simple with Scrum, right? We have our commitments, we have our time boxes and so on, but we also have our planning, and we've talked about, if you will, the planning and our forecast, and making those commitments carefully. This is a really big deal that we talk about when we do our sprint planning. Are we all in and making that commitment? Now, we understand that it's just an estimate and it's the best information we have at the time. But again, this counterfeit of over-promising and under-delivering, or being casual with our commitments. There's that thing of the helium hand that, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. Well, are you really able to live up to those commitments? Because that, again, can erode trust very quickly if we're not able to keep up with those commitments. So even if we have a review and we don't have anything done, we want to hold the commitment of having that review. We want to share with our team and our stakeholders what happened this sprint. Sprints and projects and are real life things. And it's not a matter of if life happens, it's when life happens. And what are we doing to making sure that we're living up to those commitments? And again, I always find this sentence interesting of make commitments carefully, because it's your word, it's your team's word. That's the thing that we want to make sure that our stakeholders are building that confidence and trust with us. Because again, the opposite is breaking those commitments or violating those promises. And we want to make sure that we're not doing that. I used to always say this, as my parents would say, oh, Kris, I can't trust you anymore. You didn't show up for this or that. And now I have to earn their trust. And as a kid, I'm like, what? Now I understand that a lot. It is really hard sometimes to get that trust back. And so that's where, again, where we practice these behaviors and we work together to make that happen. I don't know if you guys have ever had that happen, but yeah, I take it a lot more seriously now that I'm an adult. So, and last but not least, we have number 13. And this is extending trust. And it sounds simple, but it can be really hard. And this is where we want to make sure that we're not just extending blind trust. This is where we build up all of those behaviors. And that's, again, the spirit of Scrum just fits this so well, that we're not going in blindly, that we're proving through demonstration that we're getting things done. We're proving through teamwork and collaboration that we are able to work together, that we're able to have those conversations. We have healthy friction that's going on in the team. And we've got passion and all of that fun that we've got for continuous learning and so on, because we don't want blind trust. What we're looking for is smart trust. And that, again, goes back to, the heart and the brain and having that empathy and really understanding what it takes to have that magic in teamwork. And this is where I look at it from the smart trust, that we want to be up in this space. We want to have it so that we can be deliberate, but that we're not withholding trust, and that we're able to make sure that we are going in with that smart trust. Because we don't want to have little or no thought. This side is not what we want at all. But as we continue to work together, and for any reason, if something has happened, what we want to do is continue to work forward and figure out what that can be for smart trust. And sometimes you might have to start over if your team has had some issues and so on. Just even going through these behaviors of starting, what does talk straight look like to us? What does this look like to us? Can really help to build up some of that smart trust. Because there have been times, I will say professionally and personally, that I trusted something or someone and it didn't go as planned. But I definitely don't want to go to the opposite of not trusting. So I just need to be mindful and deliberate of building those trust back up. So those are the 13 behaviors. I don't know, Glenn, if you want to try or of the exercise.
Yeah, definitely. We've got a few minutes, sure.
Okay. What would you guys say if cynicism is building up because of a lack of trust? Can you think of any of the trust behaviors that might help? Anything come to mind?
I'll repost the 13 as well in the chat, so
Cool. Thank you.
people can refer back to that.
I would kind of say, I'll show you the answers in this one, just to kind of give you an idea. Oh, cool. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Number one, which is talk straight. What about number three? What do you guys think of that? Create transparency if we've got cynicism going on. Right, wrongs. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Really, any of them can apply, but the spirit these are the ones that are most profound, I guess. Show loyalty of giving credit to others. That would be a good one if we've got some cynicism going on, of making sure everyone knows that they're contributing to it. Number 8 is confront reality. I think someone said that, of transparency or right wrongs. And number 12, keeping commitments. So yeah, if we've got cynicism, these are just some ideas of things that you guys can do to help continue to build that trust. But I know you guys have trust on all your teams. So this would be for those that don't.
The caveat generally is, yeah, there's trust when things are going well.
Yeah.
But, if there's a major thing that we're trying to change or something, it's a lot of the cases of management in organizations where Scrum is coming into play. They're like, okay, cool. I see you're doing your little meetings and I see the product backlog that's got our features and our requirements. Oh, that's cool. Oh, wait, you want to be a self-organizing team? Oh, wait, you want the product owner to make all the decisions of the products without the the CEO, driving that? We don't trust that. So it's like, it's this dichotomy, right?
Yep. And that's a really good point on that self-organization, self-management, and empowering the team, helping folks to see what does that look like. Because again, the furthest that you can get off is the length of your sprint. And that was one of the things that we had to work with leadership to say, hey, we can only be off 2 weeks because our sprints were 2 weeks. And you're going to come back to the review and you're going to see it. The product owner should be sharing it along the way and so on. But that really helped to build the trust. All right, here's another one. Our team suffers from a credibility problem. Do you have a guess on any trust behaviors that might help there?
Anne says 1, 6, and 12.
Ooh, let's take a look.
And Femi says 8, 10, and 12.
8, 10, and 12. Well, interesting. Now, this is according to Stephen Covey, so up to you. But yes, I think any of them apply. In this case, he's saying to be transparent again, right the wrongs and deliver results and get better, if you will. But I think, what do you have? 1, 6, and 12, did you guys say? Yeah. Keep commitments. That's a huge one of a credibility problem. Keeping commitments.
Yeah, I'd say that one.
Yeah, I would agree big time. And that's why I say any of these can work. And that's why this is kind of what we did with our teams, is we shared these behaviors so that we were all speaking the same language and we could work together of the different ways that we could continue to build that trust. All right, number 3, sorry. People won't talk about important issues. What would you guys guess on that one? Probably confront reality right away. I'll show you.
Technical debt.
I'm sorry?
I was just thinking maybe technical debt.
Oops, hang on one second. Sorry, I was clicking the chat and it got me too hot. There we go. People won't talk about important issues. Technical debt. Yeah, that's a real issue, right? What do we do on technical debt? Is that an opportunity that we can have that talk straight, which is number 1, if you will, and helping folks to see, because that is a huge conversation that a lot of folks don't like to have. That was one of the hardest things, I think, when at American Airlines, our mobile web, we had a ton of technical debt, just a ton of it. And we could not continue to build off of that foundation, but our product owner and stakeholders wanted new functionality. And we had to have that conversation on technical debt. And we had to negotiate and manage those expectations to really understand what did we need to get ourselves out of that. And that was a huge opportunity for building that trust. And we had to prove it every time.
Yeah, it really takes trust to do effective negotiations.
Yes.
Because people might get the sense that you're trying to dodge something or, not in good faith. So that's critical to have that.
Yeah. And in this case, what was happening is there was this perception or assumption that the IT people just wanted to work on the fun technical things and not the new stuff. And that was not the case at all. We had to be very straightforward and confront the reality that we had taken on debt that we shouldn't have, and that we'd done some shortcuts and we had not built that quality. So kind of going back to that definition of done, from there on, we really highlighted the quality being built in. All right. I need to build trust with my coworkers. Have you guys ever been in that situation? Or you could say your kids or whatever on this one. In this case, I'll show you there's quite a few. Let me go back to number 2. So we've got demonstrate respect, create that transparency, show loyalty, which is giving that credit, deliver the results. And then again, number 12, which I think is a good one for all of them. And like I say, yeah, thank you, Anne, because there's no right or wrong. And a lot of it is our style of how do we want to do things. Exactly. All right. Now, the next 2 are interesting because gaining the trust of someone older is different than building the trust of someone younger. And this is, again, the opportunity of having empathy and working together of what does it take to build that trust, and just understanding the different cultures that we all come with from our different generations, I guess. So in this case, let me pull up. We've got number 2, which is demonstrate respect. We've got deliver results. We get better, and we listen first. That's for building with someone older. If we now look at building trust for someone younger, would you guys, I kind of gave you a clue, but do you think that there are the same ones here, or would you add something to on younger, the difference with older and younger? Let me show you. Number 2, we have the same. Number 1 is a biggie, yeah. So we have, if you will, on number 2 being the same, but then we have, so we want to demonstrate respect. So both older and younger like that. But number 2 is transparency. I mean, number 3 is transparency for you, the someone younger. Being transparent of what we did, why did we make that decision? Interesting, that's not the same generally. Again, this is a broad brush, but just taking a look and being empathetic to the different cultures, like I say, or the different ways that we have entered in the business world and so on. Number 5, of show loyalty, of giving credit to others. Again, a really important part if we're building trust with someone younger, making sure that everyone sees that it took a team and we don't have the heroes, that we're all working together. And then this one I found interesting, of number 13, of building, extending that trust, to start out neutral and extend it rather than having to earn it. So again, just kind of interesting to be mindful of the different generations that we're working with. And this, again, is something that you guys can do with your teams if you want to, just to add some fun. But we found it helpful as we were getting our teams together and doing team building things. These were just some things that we found that were fun to go for. All right, so in summary, basically what we wanted to just highlight is, again, creating that change starts with ourselves. And again, that whether I'm cooking, baking, doing whatever I'm doing, whether it's the teamwork, whatever, having fun, playing sports, whatever, we are looking that the change starts with us first, and that we build that out. And how do we influence them? Who do they influence? And really going back to that integrity and intent, because we can see from the trees, if I go back to that analogy of the trust from a tree, that it is our behaviors of our integrity and our intent that we want to make sure that we're taking advantage of building that trust. And again, embrace that learning journey. For those of us who don't cook yet, well, that's not true. On Easter, I actually was helping out a little bit more. I'm generally the cleaner upper, but continue your learning journey, whatever that is. Agile, whatever it is in Agile, taking advantage of it. There's always new and exciting things coming out. For those who are cooking and baking, remember how you got good at it. For those of us who are learning this, but find something you're passionate about and keep tremendously interested in it. And I think Julia Childs was the epitome of that. If you watch some of her old shows and all of that, the excitement that she would show is that we want to make sure that we're bringing that to the table every day, whether it be personal or professional. And a lot of that has to do with the trust that we're behaving, the way that we're behaving, and so on. And cooking is one failure after another, and that's how you finally learn. And that's the one thing we know about when we're digging into this, that with Scrum and Agile and all of that, that we want to lean into it. We want to try, we want that that experimental mindset. We want to have that learning journey and taking advantage of that, because we want to make sure that we're building that right thing at the right time. And it doesn't have to be fancy. We want simplicity. Reward simplicity, you guys. Because at the end of the day, it's all about, making sure that we see the importance of trust everywhere. We speak in ways that communicate that trust. Really, really important, because that's the way that we behave in the ways that demonstrate it. And if nothing else, I think that Scrum has really, really helped us in that world to build that trust with our teams, our stakeholders, and our customers. At the end of the day, that's why we do what we do, is for our customers. And that's all I got.